Hello, in this video, I'm going to show you how to create objects in JavaScript and how to access properties of objects in JavaScript along with other object concepts. By the end of this video, you should be comfortable creating and using objects in JavaScript. Let's start. Welcome back. In this video, we're going to look at JavaScript objects and outline the core concepts that you need to understand for you to work with JavaScript objects. In most of your JavaScript code, you're going to be writing objects, manipulating objects, so having a foundation of objects in JavaScript is an invaluable asset in your JavaScript coding skills. As always, I'd like to begin with a list of the things that we're going to cover in this tutorial to help you understand these concepts and follow through to the end of this tutorial. So the first, we are going to deal with object creation. In this part, we are going to look at the various ways to create objects in JavaScript. So we are going to use the object literal syntax as the first way to create JavaScript objects. Then we're going to look at the other one, the older way of creating objects using constructor functions. Then we also going to look at the class syntax, create objects. Then after creating objects, we will look at how the second concept will be how to access objects. You can access objects in JavaScript using two methods. The first is the dot, we call it the dot notation, and the second is the bracket notation. The third concept will be modifying objects, and we can modify objects using the dot and the bracket. So I'd like to copy that. The fourth concept about objects in JavaScript is object methods. Object methods are functions that are passed on objects, and we will look at how to create objects method, and we will look at how to access methods of objects. The other concept we will look at is how to iterate over or loop through an object. It should be through or over an object. In this part, we will have the various concepts that we need to understand. The first is using for in, then using the object dot key, then using object dot values, then entries, then object dot entries. After iterating over an object, the other concept we need to learn is object destructuring. This is the sixth concept. We're going to look at destructuring syntax, how to destructure an object, and we will look at a specific example. The seventh concept we will look at about objects is object prototype, and in this we will look at how to access object prototype, and the second one, how to add, like how you can add object prototype. Then the last bit, we cannot talk about objects in JavaScript and not talk about the last part, which is JSON, JavaScript Object Notation, or JSON, which is a format that is used to exchange data in most applications. For JSON, we will want to look at how to convert JavaScript object to string, or convert JavaScript objects to string, and how to convert JSON object to string. So this we have the .parse and .stringify. These are the 8 concepts that we are going to discuss with using specific examples in this tutorial about JavaScript objects. By the end of this tutorial, you should be comfortable working with JavaScript objects. Let's begin now with the first part, which is creating objects in JavaScript. Using the object retro syntax is the easiest way to create objects in JavaScript and the fastest and the most common. Suppose we are building an application for our customers, and we have an object, the name customer, which has these values: the first name of the customer, then the last name of the customer, then the address. That's how we create our first object using the object retro syntax. So this syntax simply means you define with the const keyword, then the name of the object, then the curly brackets. That's how you create an object. The reason we use the const is we don't expect the object to change, so we define it using the const keyword and we cannot redeclare it. The items inside this object can change, we can modify as you're going to see in other parts of this tutorial, but we cannot change the object itself. The properties can change, but the objects cannot change. It cannot be redeclared. In here, we can give this a string, then this is a string as well. This address can take another object. We can have something like a location, then this location can be a string, Ethiopia. Then we can have a street, this can be a number. We can have something else like a zip, and we can go on and on. Basically, that's how you use the object literal syntax to create an object. You define it using the const keyword, then you use the equal sign and these curly brackets, then you can pass in numbers, objects, or any data type. As long as you define the key, the value can be any data type. The other way of creating an object is using the constructor function. We define, this is the older way of creating objects in JavaScript, where we use a function, then we can give the function the name of a person. Then in here, we can now begin passing these values. I'll pass the first name as parameters, then the last name, then we can move it to a different line, then the address, then we put the curly brackets. This function now, in here, we use this keyword, this, to reference to this particular object that we just created. Then we pick the first name as the first parameter, then we equate it to first name. Then again, we repeat this for the second parameter, and we repeat it for the third parameter. So this should be last, then this will be equal to the last, then this should be the address, and it should be equal to the address. The differences now in between this way of declaring using the object literal syntax and using this person, this constructor function, we now need to, outside here, to now get a hold of the object, we need to instantiate it. Like person, then we use the new keyword, then we can pass in now the parameters, like we can pass in the first name as Joe, then the last name as Joe, then we can pass in the location or the address as a number. For us to use this person object, we need to instantiate it, as you can see here. That is a second way to create using constructor functions. Then this constructor function needs to be wrapped up in a class. We would need to redo this in the class using the class syntax. In all the JavaScript code, you're going to come across objects created in this manner, where we begin by now defining a class. Then suppose the class is a person, then this should not have a curly bracket. That's how you define a class, not a function. This person class takes in this constructor. Now this will become the constructor function. So we can copy this, then we are going to call this constructor. So this is our constructor. It takes in the first name, the last name, the address, then it uses this keyword which references to the object to the person object, then it equates each of these parameters that we pass in the constructor or variables to their actual value. Then again here, once you have this, you're going to instantiate the class, create an instance of this class for you to access the object. So those are the ways of creating JavaScript object. In most cases, you're going to be using the object literal syntax because this is the modern way to do it. So these are only good for your reference, or if you come across older code that uses functions, constructor functions, to create JavaScript objects. Once we have created an object, we can now access the object properties using two methods. We can use the dot notation or the bracket notation. To access using the dot notation, this is our object. So I'd like to copy it again. The dot notation, you simply write the object's name, customer dot, then you pick the property. So we can go with the first name. Let's log this. So customer.firstname, and we get the name. Then we can access the inner one. Suppose you'd like to access the location. This should be location. So we can do address, then dot location. Then the location should be Utopia. Then we can access the street and we get the street address. This is how to use the dot notation to access JavaScript properties, objects property. The other method is using the bracket. The bracket notation works like this. So customer, then we put brackets, then we put the quotes, brackets with quotes, then the particular object key that you would like to access. And we can see we are now accessing using this bracket notation. We can now move to access the location. So in this case, we would pass in the address first, then we would pass in here the location, and it gives us Utopia. So this is less common, but it's very useful in some certain instances. But the most common way to access object properties is using the dot notation. The other concept is modifying or changing the object properties. That's the third concept. We'll use the same object, but now modify it. So to modify, we use both the bracket and the bracket and the dot notation. The same way we would do something like this. To modify, we would do something like customer street address is equal to, we change it to something else, like then it's going to log the new address. So what we are simply doing, we are using the dot notation, but we are adding an equal sign and the new value. The same way with the first name, we can do something like customer first name property, customer.firstname property, then we give the first name, the Smith, and it's going to have the object first name to be Smith. So if we change here, if we copy this, first name we changed it to Smith, then the last name we change it to Matt maybe, then we change the address, we change this address to a simple number, which is without that kind of location, without that kind of an array. So we just call it 893. If we console log this object now, we should see the object has changed. The object, we have now created a new object with the new address, new first name, and new last name. So objects are a blueprint to create other objects. So by modifying the object, you can create a new object. So that's how to modify an object using the dot notation and the bracket notation. The next concept of objects is objects methods. Let's get rid of that. Objects method allow us to pass functions as properties to objects. I'll use the same example of this customer object. In here, we can add an extra function to give us the full name. So we can have it as full name. Then it takes in a function, just like a normal function, because I mentioned that the object, so long as you've given the object the key, you can give it any other data type. It can be another object, an array, a function. So here we are giving it a function, and that's what we call methods. So this function can return, it's going to return, then we can use the backtick syntax. We return, we reference now to this object using the keyword this dot first name. Then we out here, we add again the last name, this dot last name. So that's what we are returning. So we are returning a combination of the first name and the last name to give us the we need to put a comma in between here. Give us the full name. This function can be accessed just like we are using the dot notation to access outside here. So we can access it like previously, the way we accessed this. So down here we can console log, then we do customer dot full name. Then we close this. This is a function, so we need to call it for it to work. Functions need to be called. And it's going to give us the first name and the last name combined, which is the full name. This is a method of this object that gets us the first name. We can see this is a function, and this function returns a string. So that's how you access objects and create object methods. That's how you access object methods and create object methods. The other concept of objects is iterating over the object. We can use this syntax to iterate over the object. I'll use the same object, and the first we can use for. We just write for in bracket, then const key. In, we are looking for the keys that are present in this customer object. Then in here we can do pass the key. Then we also pass the key. Then here we can do customer, copy this. Then in bracket the key. Then we save that. You can see now the entire object is logged on the console. So this is how you use the for in. Let me comment out this and now guide you on how to use the object keys. You can create a constant here. The keys will be equal to, then you tap on the object dot keys. Then you pass the object to the customer. Then we log this. You see the keys for that particular object. And we see the keys in form of an array. This similar syntax, we use it for the values, but now we change this to values. Then the method changes to values. Then we log in here the values. And now we get the values of that object. Then we can use entries in the same way, which will give us arrays of each entry. We can do entries. Then these will turn to entries. We are still passing the customer object. Then we log the entries. And the entries is a collection of 4 arrays. The first, the second, the third, the fourth. You can see the length is 4. And also it's important to remember, since this is an array within an array, we can access each specific, if you would like, let me clear this screen. If we would like to access one specific entry, the last one, we can add these square brackets and pass the index of this array. Then we can change this to full name entry. So the full name entry, then we are getting the object entries, then we are grabbing the last array, this one. So I'd like to console log this, and we have the last one. So that's how you iterate over objects in JavaScript. The other concept is destructuring. Destructuring is breaking down objects or arrays to create variables. For example, if you have this customer object and I need to comment it out, then we close this. We can remove this. We can remove that last comma. We have 2 entries in this object, the first name and the last name. So the destructuring concept is breaking down this array into variables. You do const, then bracket, then equals customer. That's the destructuring syntax. Then we can get this first name in here. Then we put a comma and the last name in here. So we now have 2 variables created from this object using this destructuring syntax. You can access this as normal variables, and it gets you the value of that particular variable, since we've now destructured it from the object to a variable. And of course, the other will work. Last name will still work. If you'd like to destructure a more complex or with an extra number, for example, if we had an entry here of age, so we would need to add it here for it to work. Then if the customer is of that age, maybe they are not allowed to buy that product, and the age is 21 from this object, and so on and so forth. So that is how to destructure an object in JavaScript. Now we move to the object prototype. Every object has a default built-in method that we call an object prototype. This object prototype allows us to add our own, we can also add our own prototypes, but we are not allowed to customize the default prototypes for default JavaScript objects. So let me get hold of this. I'd like to copy the previous object, so I can comment out that. Then I get this object. This object has a prototype method that we can access by the method getObject.prototype. So we can do something like const customer object prototype. This will be equal to, we get the object, then this method get prototype of, then you pass the object. Then you can log this on the console to see all the methods available on this object. So once we log on the console, we can now see this object. Then it has all these methods. Basically, a prototype is like blueprint that we use to define the various aspects of an object. You can also add onto this object a new kind of method. We can do something like this. We can call it adding property to object prototype. So we can do something like customer dot say hello. It's a function. Then this function has no parameters, so we simply log on the console. We log hello. This object dot first name and the last name. This object dot last name. We have now added this say hello method to the object prototype of this customer object. So we can now call the method customer dot say hello, and let's comment out this and save. Then you see we are now getting access to these object properties using our new method that we added. So that's a very basic introduction to object prototype. I have a more advanced tutorial on this particular subject, so you can check out on this channel. I'd like to move to the last part of dealing with objects that you need to understand, the concept of JSON, JavaScript Object Notation. Again, I comment out this. JSON allows us to exchange data in between applications, and JSON is used in nearly everywhere that you want to exchange data between applications. It's very common to come across JSON APIs, and sometimes it can be very confusing. So I would like to use this object to explain the concept of JSON. So one of the things that we need to learn when working with JSON is how to convert a JavaScript object like this object to a JSON string. So we use the method stringify. So we'll do something like const JSON string. So we are converting this object into a JSON string is equal to, then this is the method JSON.stringify, this method. Then we pass the object we would like to convert to a string. Then we can log this, and we can now view the data. We have now converted that object into a JSON string. We can also do the reverse, which is converting now the JSON. This should be converting the JSON string JavaScript object. The other way around is we can now take in this, the JS object equal to JSON.pass. Then we pass in the string we would like to convert to an object. Once we pass a string, we can now log this object, and now we have back our object. That's how we use JSON. There is a more advanced tutorial on this, so this was just to introduce you to how to work with JavaScript objects and JSON. So that's it for this tutorial, and I hope you can now begin using JavaScript objects. And if you learned something new, or at least you appreciate, if you've watched up to this point, you should appreciate this effort by giving this video a thumbs up and support my channel by subscribing. Thank you. I hope by the end of this video, you've learned something new about using and creating objects in JavaScript. Kindly consider giving this video a thumbs up and do not forget to subscribe. See you in the next video.